Hi, this is Ralph for WeatherWool. Thanks for being here with us in Gillette, Wyoming. This is 30th of March, 2024. I'm at the Innes Ranch with Bob Innes, who is owner, manager, I think just about everything else on this ranch. And Bob has, for the last couple of years, been the primary source of our fiber. One of the things that we're hoping to do with WeatherWool, it's being made possible as the company grows, is that we will be able to make garments from a single point of origin. And that's one of the reasons we're here at the Innes Ranch today. Is I'm hoping that sometime in 2025, we'll be able to offer garments that are made solely from fiber grown by Bob Innes and his family right here on the Innes Ranch in eastern Wyoming. And one of the things we hope to do when we have that fabric and those garments is to actually have a garment tag that'll say something like Innes Ranch with one of the brands here, the 35 or the...
This is the Lazy VE brand that's registered for cattle, sheep, and it's probably the oldest brand for the ranch. The 35 was acquired a little bit later, but we put both of them on our sheep and our cattle, and it's a pretty unique thing to know that finally we know where our product's going, because up until this point in time, we put it in a bale, or in the old days, a sausage bale or a bag, a wool bag, and in those days they went on a rail car, and we had no idea where it was going or what it was going to be utilized for. And the wool being made into garments is a pretty unique thing, pretty special for us.
So it's a kind of an exciting thing for me, and buying more wool enables us to get to know our ranchers better, but it also opens up different possibilities from the production standpoint. It gives us more flexibility as we become larger buyers, and that's really exciting.
We did that with the Mountain State Slam deal with our lamb, and once you know that you've got ownership in that product to the end product, it makes you a lot more conscientious, and you start thinking about, the quality and where that's going to end up and who may be wearing it. So I think it's going to be a positive thing for everybody, and it's going to be a really neat deal for us. We so much appreciate that you've bought our wool, because I talked to rancher and wool grower after wool grower that has wool sitting in a warehouse that isn't selling it, and it's really unfortunate, because they're pretty disillusioned with the wool thing, and some of those guys have really good wool, and so I feel more than fortunate that we've been able to market our wool and then turn it into product and know where it's going is pretty special for us.
Well, you've definitely earned it, and people have told me repeatedly that the Innes clip is about as good as it gets. Bob, when did your family first come here?
My granddad came from Scotland in 1907 and landed in New York in October 13th, 1907. And there was a cousin of his that was living in this area of Wyoming. She was married to Alex Archibald, and they helped pay for his trip to come out and to come to Wyoming. And so he didn't waste any time. I mean, he came from Scotland as soon as he could and never went back, and was here at the ranch he worked in Gillette for the first couple of years, and then he started herding sheep in this area, and he worked here until he retired, which was 1952, 1953 that they moved to Gillette. And then my dad took over the ranch at that point in time. I was born in Gillette, and I've been here my entire life. I'm 71 years old, and sheep have been a part of it from day one. And I'm really the beneficiary, because the heavy lifting was done by my granddad and my dad. My dad was kind of visionary, and in a lot of ways they went from the stage where all the sheep were herded, and with sheep wagons they'd follow the bands of sheep around, and that's what my granddad did when he first came out to this area, was herded sheep, and herded them for the Archibald family, and then they evolved into pasture situations where they no longer had herders, and my dad refenced all the pastures and pretty much set up the rotation designs on this ranch, and also built the sheds that I've been a beneficiary of. And so he was quite the beneficiary, and I always felt they made it really easy for me. My thought was,
Yep.
geez, I just hope I don't screw this up.
Well, that's the way it should be. You want to make it easier for your kids, although that's not always good either. But the story there, as a parent goes. Can you tell us about the sheep themselves, please?
When I was growing up and in early stages, the flock of sheep was a Panama breed, which was developed in Idaho. And the Panama is a coarser wool breed, but a very long staple. Conformation-wise, they're very stout-built, meaty sheep. And I guess similar to maybe what a Cordale is, but the Panama breed at that time was very popular in this area because every year in June they would bring a semi-load of rams to the ranch here, and Fred Laidlaw would follow that semi out, and they'd unload those rams, and there would be 25 or 30 of the Campbell County ranchers that would come, and they would get anywhere from 2 to 20 rams and take back. And so the Panamas were kind of the predominant breed in this area at that time, and they're fairly coarse, but they're a pretty hardy breed, and everybody was not everybody, but most of these guys are really happy with them. And then we would send a load of yearling ewes back on that semi to Idaho. So it worked out really good for us because we were selling a load of yearling ewes every year to go back to Idaho and getting those rams. And then when I was just starting 4-H, the county agent by the name of Mel Lynch said, you guys need to check out this Targhee breed. And my dad said, oh, okay, and so we started going to the Targhee sales and buying Targhees, which were a finer wool sheep. And Montana had a lot of the Targhees, but Mel Lynch was a big advocate of Targhees. And so we started out with 8 or 10 sheep, and then we just kept building our flock. And we've kept, since 1960, we've kept a Targhee flock on this ranch, and then we started registering ewes, and we run about 100 head of purebred Targhees, and that's where we get outside rams for stud rams, but we raise all of our own rams now for the ranch, and have for several years, probably 50 years. We've bought very few outside rams. All our rams have been raised with our purebred flock, and so it's really critical that we do things right with that purebred bunch, and we keep trying to incorporate more information into it, like the comfort factor things that for a long time we had no idea about the comfort factor. We try to get carcass information to help select rams that are better at carcass, and we pick rams that fleece-wise, we think are exactly what we need to see down the road. And it takes a while for that ram selection to filter through our range herd. Mm-hmm. Because after all these years, part of the staple length I can attribute to the Panama breed is still that DNA.
Wow. Is
still affecting and helping us out with that staple length. And of course you see some of those sheep flare out. I have to really try to, I don't do individual microns, all my yearling ewe replacements that are range replacements, but we do that on our purebred replacements. But I'll see some of those ewes that'll be coarse. They'll just flare out and be really coarse. And so it's amazing how long that DNA affects your genetics. And but we've managed to bring our wool, when we first started doing tests, was a 24, a 23 half, 23/8 micron fleece, and we brought it down slowly but surely, and we a few years we got deep into the 21s, but we started finding that when you were at 20 to 21 in those herd use, you lost so much volume and you started losing staple length, and also your carcasses got pretty fine bone. So the sweet point for us is 21.5 to 22.5, and in the rams 23, because those rams, I'll try not to keep anything coarser than 23, but if I keep a 22 to 23, I've found that that's where I continue to keep my wool production and my staple length in that range. If I go with some of those finer ones, then I lose volume and I don't have the pounds of wool to market. Wool has always been a high priority with me, and probably to the point, maybe if you base on economics, maybe I've overweighted my wool preferences, and at times I've been told that you focus way too much on wool because lamb's 75% or more of your income a lot of years instead of the wool. But I was turned on to wool by a professor at the University of Wyoming when I went to school there, and I was talked into. I judged wool in 4-H and competed in the state contest, and I really just kind of went through the motions. I really didn't understand the magic of wool, and so when I got to the university, there's a wool judging team at the university at the time, and the coach said, "Hey, one of our guys isn't going to come back this year, and when we need somebody to fill that slot." And I said, "I really wasn't coming to the university to judge wool. I was thinking I was going to kind of take it easy." And he said, "No, and I said, "Okay." And then he said, in fact, we're going to forego your freshman season and put you on the senior team because we're desperate for a wool judger." So I got to do the fast track, and we got to go to Kansas City and judge wool in a national contest, collegiate contest, and I became fascinated, with at that time the Texans kind of owned the wool judging. They had the teams that were really tough to beat and competitive, and so then the next year there was a professor by the name of Leroy Johnson at the University of Wyoming, and I thought I'll just take that class, and because Leroy was really a sharp guy, and he taught me more, until you came along, taught me more about wool
Well,
than I ever knew. And I thought, man, what a magical fiber this is, and it's pretty unique. And Leroy was a superstar, and it's too bad that he couldn't present his stuff to all the wool growers, because there's so much of this education that is not there and available, like we mentioned earlier, to the growers, and he was a great advocate of wool.
Well, I think that we will be growing the industry and getting more and more scientific knowledge about what wool can do, how it performs, etc. But yeah, we are kind of lacking now, and what I usually fall back on when I try to explain to people what separates wool from the synthetics or from cotton is that if you think about it, cotton is made by nature to disperse cotton seeds. At least that's my understanding. It has nothing to do with clothing. It's just
Right.
a lucky happenstance for us. And the synthetics, of course, were designed to be clothing in many cases. But if you compare the most sophisticated creations of man, our cell phones, our jet planes, whatever, they're really trivial technology compared to every cell in our bodies, and the sophistication and relentless testing that natural products undergo, just way beyond anything we do in our laboratories. And so you have a polypropylene fiber. It's generally speaking very uniform, kind of like a piece of spaghetti, but on of course a smaller level. But nevertheless, there isn't that much going on there. And then you look at a diagram of a woolen fiber. There's all these different levels, layers, all different structures, very, very complex, and all of it fully functional, or it wouldn't be there in the first place. Mm-hmm. And so kind of like what I tell people is wool was created by nature to be clothing, to clothe an animal that's almost the same as us. Sheep run just a little bit warmer than people do, and the purpose is the same. The clothing is supposed to enable that animal to maintain its steady body temperature through all kinds of conditions with a minimal expenditure of its own energy. And we are fortunate to be able to just kind of piggyback on what nature gives us, and the other fibers, performance-wise, can't come anywhere near what wool can do. And I remember talking to a customer on the phone about this a year or two ago, and I was going into some of this information, and he just cut me off and he said, "God knows what he's doing." And I said, "Okay,
pretty well sums it up."
That's you don't need to go any farther than that." And people have been doing things to wool to try and make it cheaper, but they're not making it better. And we want to stay out of the way, not interfere with what nature has given us, and try to make the best quality we can, but by mostly bringing out nature's gifts. Can you tell us about predation at all, please?
It's a constant, ongoing problem, and it
First,
continues to get worse.
What predators are we talking about?
The coyote is by far the biggest problem for us, just because of our geographic location. If we were in a different area, we'd be dealing with the bears.
This is again eastern Wyoming.
Right, we're eastern Wyoming, and we're far enough away from the Bighorn Mountains and the wolf areas that we've had one confirmed wolf kill when they first few years when they introduced them in Yellowstone, and assured us that we wouldn't have any problems with wolves coming this far. And I had a trapper call me one morning and say, "Hey, you need to come look at this." And so I did, and he said, "I think this is a wolf kill." And he said, "Nobody will believe me, but I want you to witness it." And but it was right behind our Chimney Hill. And so the wolves are becoming more and more mobile, or more and more prevalent in the area, but the coyote is just an ongoing battle. And they're so adaptable and they're so smart, and they just create a challenge for us, and we lose thousands of dollars every year to coyotes, and we're being more handicapped in our ability to protect our sheep when they took the toxicants away from us, and that was an unbelievable effective tool for us. And if it's used right, it was an unbelievably safe tool. But it got a bad rap, misinformation, just hyped it, and so they just took it away from us and said, "Hey, no problem. We're going to provide predator control for you guys. We'll provide aerial. We'll do whatever we need, but don't worry, And so I think that's what they told the Indians too when they took the land.
Long on promise, short on results.
Exactly, and then it's just been an increased, ongoing battle. And we've tried. We have trappers that work full time, and they do a fairly good job, but the coyote is so unbelievably smart. We had a coyote in one of our pastures last year that we saw him a couple of times, or saw her a couple of times, and we saw her chasing sheep. We found kills, and the trapper worked all summer long, and he kept thinking, "Well, this is the one. I got this one. This is the one." And finally, last fall, we would turn ewe lambs out there, and we'd go out, and Kirsten would go out in the pasture, and there'd be 2 or 3 new kills or damaged lambs that you'd have to kill. Because contrary to what is hyped, the coyotes do more damage just for the fun of it than they do killing and eating a sheep. They'll come through and bite the throats, or they'll tear up a leg, or unless it's a family feeding pups, very seldom do they eat hardly anything out of a sheep. They just kill it and tear up its face or its throat. But once they bite the windpipe, it's pretty much 100% fatal. You can't bring those lambs back. So they're standing out there bleeding and trying to breathe through a crushed windpipe. And so that's one of the hardest things you do, is have to shoot your own sheep.
I bet. Wow.
But we ended up putting up with that coyote and all summer long and into the fall. And finally one day, Kirsten said, "Hey, we got 2 new damaged lambs out there." And so we went out, and I said, "Well, hopefully we get some aerial control, but I'm going to go out with a motorcycle and see if I can get him to move up or find out if I can locate." And the trapper came, the helicopter came, and the helicopter, I mean, was just almost ground level at times, flying over brush patches because we knew that coyote was there. And I kept riding any place that had cover. I would go up the creek and in the grass and in the patch of brush. And we were at this 2.5 hours. And finally I said, "Well, there's one patch over the east side that I haven't gotten to." And the helicopter is getting ready to go. I mean, it's expensive flying. And he's hanging around and being a really good trooper. The trapper's out. Kirsten's watching. I go through this patch of brush, and this coyote jumps up 20 feet ahead of me out of this patch of brush. And later the helicopter said, "There's a dead lamb right over the hill." And we hovered over that brush and could not see that coyote. Well, long story short, we finally did get that coyote. But that coyote by itself cost us $13,000 worth of lambs.
Wow, one coyote.
Pretty expensive coyote.
I'll say that's astounding.
And we're dealing with one of those every year now. We'll get several coyotes throughout the course of the year, and they'll try to take care of the dens. But the trapper works hard, but the coyotes, they know. I mean, they know the snares, they know the traps, they know the airplanes. They get the deal figured out.
Famously smart animals, and you have an awful lot of space here. Unbelievably
smart. And we don't have abundant cover compared to a lot of areas that are trying to raise sheep. That's what's, solely the leading demise of the sheep industry has been the predator problem. Secondly is the labor issue, but the predators have just continually put guys out of business. And we try guard dogs, and in a herded situation, the guard dogs are pretty effective, but where we open range and let our sheep run through, the guard dogs have so much ground to cover, and the coyotes figure out what the guard dog's habits are. And we'll hear the guard dog barking at night, and we'll hear him in this pasture, we'll hear him there. So we know what they do help us with is they allow the sheep to kind of graze and manage the pasture. But we lost our last guard dog last fall, and we haven't replaced it. And we put sheep in one of our far north pastures that normally they hit that pasture and they think, well, we're in paradise. And we go back the next day to feed them, and they're along the fence. And where we put them in, they're wanting back out of there. And I said, "Oh, we've got a problem." So we started doing a little predator control and managed to get the coyote. Finally, we had to move the sheep back out of the pasture. Got no utilization out of that pasture because the coyote just kept the pressure on, and we couldn't get that thing managed to the point where we could graze that pasture. So we lost that pasture for sheep grazing. And
wow.
We'll have to figure out some way to deal with it. But
I haven't heard of that before either.
They will change the habits of your sheep to the point where, people tell me that a mountain lion in your sheep traumatizes them, and your sheep will never be the same after a mountain lion's gone through them. But certain coyotes can do similar. And I'll tell my trapper, because I've been here all my life, and I'll tell him, when we split our sheep up, we'll put 500 in this pasture lamb, and we'll put 500 in another pasture lamb. And then I'll start watching, and I'll start looking for sheep that are having lambing problems. And I try not to be in the middle of them, because you can do more damage driving through sheep when they're lambing. But and I'll tell him, "Hey, well, I've got a coyote problem because my sheep are here and here, and I know where my sheep will graze that pasture. Historically, they have the same patterns. They go to the same places to bed at night, and they'll have lambs. And when that thing starts changing and that routine's, then I know I've got something that's tipping that deal over. And it's a coyote. And we have eagle problems, which is more seasonal at lambing time, the eagles. And lately, the crow population has increased to the point where they have become a problem that they will pick eyeballs out of the lambs before the ewe can even get up. After she's had that lamb at birth, the crow will be there and pick the eyeballs out of that lamb before that ewe has a chance to turn around and clean that lamb off and protect her lamb.
Holy cow! I didn't realize. So they're basically they can recognize the signs of a ewe giving birth, and they're just
there.
waiting there like undertakers.
Oh yeah, they're so smart. A crow or a raven are just unbelievably smart.
So the ravens too.
Yep. And
you have both here?
We have both, and we've been pretty fortunate because we've lambed late enough that a lot of them have either migrated and gone somewhere else or have started their habits, but the numbers are just increasing to the point where it's something that we're going to have to deal with. It's not if, it's when that they start creating problems for us.
I hadn't heard about them preying on the lambs like seconds after birth, but if a crow is going to do it, I guess that makes sense, and they are famously smart. I've seen examples of it in New Jersey also.
They are, and the eyeballs are a fascination for them. But we had 2 years ago, we had a lamb that actually survived and stayed with his mother all the way through till shipping time. That had no eyeballs, but she raised that lamb and took care of it all the way till fall, and it was just an amazing deal because you just think, wow,
And you mentioned before about being traumatized by cougars. Other ranchers have told me that the survivors of an attack by some of the predators just never really recover psychologically.
Right.
That ewes may no longer take care of their lambs, for example. It's kind of like a different animal afterwards.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. So one of the individual by Wolf from Colorado was the first person that told me that said, the coyotes are bad and bears are bad, but if you get a cougar in your sheep, some of those will never recover.
Besides that, one cougar may kill a lot of sheep in one night.
Absolutely.
We're
having a play day. Yeah, it's a play day. That's what's so frustrating. There's one spring I was lambing in a pasture west of here, and I could go from lamb to lamb to lamb. A coyote had just gone through my sheep and had bitten their throats, killed the lamb, and went to the next one and went to the next one. Never took a bite out of any of them. It just was having a picnic. Mm-hmm. But we keep trying to find different ways to protect and do things, and those people that would rather we not be in business, they just keep telling us it's like, well, that's the cost of doing business, and I think we're running on pretty fine margins right now with inflation costs that we have to deal with. It's there's so many ranches and farms have gone out of business over the last decade, and they just can't sustain these kind of losses.
Well, you've been working at that for a long time, and one of the things that we love at WeatherWool is that we frequently run into people who just have no concept of what wool can be, and then they get, we send out fabric samples. You can go on our website and click a button and it says send me some free fabric samples, and a little booklet comes along with some test swatches this size or so, and people will rub it on their face or their neck, or some people will put it inside their sock to see if it irritates their skin after a day or whatever, and we frequently hear from those people, and they'll say, like, I just had no idea that it could be like this because I've always been sensitive to wool, or I thought I was allergic to it, or what have you. And I think it's important for what we're doing now to try to offer a top-notch product, because if we can't compete on price against the synthetics, particularly if you're going to make it in the USA, as WeatherWool does, 100% American. So the only thing we can do is offer a quality product with quality service, and we need ranchers like you who are making the highest quality wool to start with, Without that as a starting point, we're not going anywhere. It would be pointless. But we're able to make, thanks to the wool you're producing, we're able to make a garment that, at this point, I frequently hear from customers. This sounds crazy, but I frequently hear from customers who wear our stuff with no base layer at all. I have a few customers who've told me, and I have this experience myself. Mostly men, but a lot of us, if we work hard or even moderately, we're going to sweat. And if you go out in the rain and you work and you wear traditional rain gear, sure, it keeps the rain out, but you're drenched on the inside from your own sweat.
Yeah.
And I would rather get wet from the rain, frankly, than the sweat. And no way to put that delicately, sorry, but that's the way it is. And what I have found, and I kind of should have asked other people wearing WeatherWool, but what people have written me lately is they've said, you know what, it's like, I've never found rain gear that works for me. And so what I've wound up doing is wearing WeatherWool with nothing underneath it. And they said, like, I don't really get wet from the rain. I don't get wet from the sweat. I don't understand how it works exactly, but this is my rain gear now, just wool. And that certainly wasn't anything we envisioned. I always wanted the wool to be soft enough to be worn on bare skin because I just felt that was a comfort factor around your neck, around your wrists. I didn't want to have to keep my wool off your skin with some other fabric. But now we have this sort of strange situation where I'm hearing pretty frequently from people who wear it as rain gear. And that wasn't a place we expected to go, but that's the comfort factor. And I was talking about that before. When we buy wool, when we measure the characteristics of wool, we look at the average micron count, the average micron thickness, a micron being a millionth of a meter, and we're looking for a certain range. But what's also really critical, besides the range, the distribution of thicknesses is always kind of like this. And so you're looking for something in the right range in here, but you're also very concerned about the tail on the high end. And generally, the industry has decided that about 30 microns is where the wool fiber kind of jabs into your skin a little bit instead of bending, like a thin fiber will bend. And so the comfort factor is the percentage of 30 micron and above subtracted from 100. So if you have 2% or less 30 micron wool, then your comfort factor is going to be 98% or above. And we're looking for 98%, and we may go a little lower and blend that with some higher comfort factor wools, depending upon a lot of other variables. But that's a critical thing, that 30 micron, and we really looking for ranches that can keep that down, because we want to show people that wool is or at least can be really comfortable.
Like Ralph says, the comfort factor is something that most of us as growers weren't aware of not long ago, and there's a lot of growers that are still not aware of it, and it's a very important thing that we need to consider. So we're documenting all of our replacement rams and our replacement ewes that are keeping our purebred bunch, and we use that comfort factor, and then we try to maintain a level of nutrition to keep that fiber strong and long and strong. But it's a genetic component and a nutrition component that work hand in hand to keep that.
Yeah, we're looking for exceptionally strong fiber, and one of the reasons for that is obviously when you're processing the fiber, you don't want it to break, because the strength of any given section of yarn, and therefore the strength of the fabric, the durability of the fabric made from that yarn, depends, among other things, but the length of the yarn is really important. The length of the fiber in the yarn is really important, because the strength of the yarn comes from the fibers rubbing against each other, the friction. When you pull on that yarn, you want the fibers to be grabbing at each other, and the longer the fibers are, the more that they can grab at each other. And if the fibers are strong enough to begin with, when you process them as individual fibers, there's less of a tendency for the fibers to break. And when they do break, you hope that the breakage is at either end rather than in the middle, But if the fibers are strong enough, as Bob's are, they're not really going to break very much at all. And that's one of the things that we test for that mostly American buyers don't.
Yeah, until we sold to Ralph, we never tested for the strength deal, and I was just because of the way our feed programs and our genetics, I thought, well, we should be okay, but we had no baseline information. We didn't know, and it's the same way as comfort factor. All of these things are important information, and it's kind of unfortunate that we haven't been focused on those things before now.
This is, I'll be visiting the folks at University of Wyoming probably on Tuesday. Some of the people running the wool programs over there, and one of the things that I want to talk to them about is the research that's kind of bolstering the industry or behind the industry. You know, I'm not an ag guy. I really think of myself as very much of an outsider coming in, which sometimes is good, sometimes is bad. I'm very ignorant of a lot of things that maybe I should know, but I'm still going to talk. And what I have found is, you know, Cody grew up on a beef ranch. You raise cattle here too. It seems like, and as well for the sheep, it seems like the meat aspect of these businesses has been thoroughly researched. They know, like, this kind of feed produces this conditions, the marbling, you know, the yield per carcass. It's fine tuned to an amazing degree. But you get to the wool side, and that kind of information really does not seem to exist. And then you take it one step further, and you say, well, if I want to make this kind of a garment, what sorts of fiber should I get? And we kind of know that. But then the next step is, how should I process that fiber? How should I make the yarn? What twist should it be? How many strands of yarn should I twist together? How should I weave it? And that information doesn't really seem to exist. Like, I would think that the industry needs to pay more attention to exactly what you can do with different types of wool, and breed sheep more for different purposes based on more solid research. And like a remarkable thing, we'll be meeting with Allison Crane, who is the executive director of Wyoming Wool Growers Association or organization. And I asked her about this, and she said that she has a PhD in nutrition. And she said, I actually wanted to do research on the wool itself, how we could use it, what we should do to create certain types of wool, like nutritionally, what the performance characteristics would be of different kinds of wool. She said there was no one to teach her. There isn't anybody who's been studying this for a long time. And when I try to look this stuff up on the web, like, for example, you know, Cody helped us. We did some experiments in the kitchen. What happens when you take some wool fabric and you spritz it with water? You know, like, wool famously actually does produce heat. People didn't really believe us, but if you look this up on the web, try and find some information, you will find information about it. But it's like from 1958. Right. There's very little modern research, and so if you are making woolen garments for someone in Wyoming, you might actually want a different fiber than if you're making woolen garments for people in Louisiana and Mississippi, where surprises a lot of people, but we do have a lot of customers down there, because they know they get this, doesn't get that cold, but like you were saying before we turned on the cameras, 35 degrees Fahrenheit, 2 degrees Celsius down on the Mississippi coast is like 0 Fahrenheit, or what is that, 18 below or something Celsius out here in Wyoming, because the humidity along the Gulf Coast just pulls the heat out of your body incredibly. And the magical thing about wool in an environment like that is the humidity will be pushing itself into your dry wool jacket, and the wool just says, oh, water's coming in, give it to me. The wool picks up that water, it starts generating heat, it creates not only a drier environment around you, but it's actually producing heat at the same time, which is an astounding thing for someone who's used to going about in cotton or synthetic. But
Exactly.
to have like a real scientist working on that and coming up with some numbers in a lab and then out in the field, I would love to find that research, and I haven't been able to find it. That kind of research does not seem to exist. And if we had that kind of stuff and the right people putting together some videos that make it interesting and entertaining, that would help bring people around to wool a lot, and we need that.
Yeah, the makeup of that fiber is probably a lot determined by nutrition, and for a grower, for a producer, to know those effects and the influences of different nutrition and minerals and trace minerals or whatever that may make a difference in that fiber, that'd be really valuable, really important.
Any young people who are listening, there's definitely room for you. I mean, we've actually been told that if you want to study this stuff, it's going to be hard to study because there aren't any mentors out there. There isn't a graduate program. I spoke with a lady who said she wanted to study this, and there was no one to be her professor.
It's true.
Imagine that.
That's amazing. Yeah, they've got all these programs, but it kind of coincides with the demise of the sheep numbers. Where there used to be millions in Wyoming, and now we're at 400 some thousand sheep breeding ewes. I mean, it's just unbelievable where the industry was and where it's come to at this point.
Well, thanks so much for having us. It was a real pleasure. Really important to me and to everybody at WeatherWool to be here at the source of so much of our fiber, and we really appreciate your hospitality. Thanks to you and your whole family, the shearing crew. We spent time with them as well, and on behalf of all of us at WeatherWool, thanks a whole bunch, and mostly thank you for raising the wool that we really need as a company.
Well, we sure hope the partnership can continue, Ralph. We appreciate you guys making the trip out here, and I thought this was really the perfect time to come because it's kind of fascinating to watch the wool roll off those sheep and watch those guys bring those fleeces out and then watch the way they handle it and package it and bale it. I mean, everybody in the process is really important and critical to us and keeping our interest in wool and our priority in wool going.